So in this tutorial, we're going to look at using raster images in Illustrator as either references for artwork, sketches to draw on top of, or using image trace to manipulate them. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to need an image, which I should have thought about before this. Okay, so let's go to Google Images and we're just going to look for a couple different types of artwork. We're just going to snag low res images and see what we get from the result. So first, let's go ahead and try and grab, let's just do a logo that's going to be maybe black and white. Let's just look for a Coca-Cola logo, right? Okay. All right. So we've got Coca-Cola logos of different styles. I'm going to go ahead. Well, that's an SVG. We don't want to do that. It's already a vector. We're going to try and do this. We want to do this as a PNG or some image based version. So if I click visit on this, we'll see if this actually clean PNG is going to let me actually grab this. If I right click on this, I'm just going to go ahead and say copy image. And then I'm going to come back to Illustrator. And I'm going to go ahead and paste that. Right. And when I paste that image in there, what it's going to do is it's pasting a raster image, right? And this is like a pretty low quality. You can see the pixelation already. And so what can we do with this artwork? Well, first, we can just use this artwork, right, in Illustrator, right? You could have an object with this involved. And so let's go ahead and say that we just wanted to use this Coca-Cola on this like gray and white grid that indicates transparency. But we want to put it in a different shape, right? And this is a tool or a process we haven't talked about for anything yet, but it's really useful. We're going to, let's say we want to fit this into an ellipse, right? So I'm going to go ahead and start by clicking here, and I'm going to create this ellipse. And I want to make it a little bit bigger so that like, oops, I did not want to draw a second ellipse. I want to make it a little bit bigger. Then I want to use the selection tool so I can actually center this. I'm going to stretch this up just a little bit more, pull this down just a little bit more so that the text is totally covered. Now I could at this point set my opacity to say 50% just so I can see see the logo behind there, but you can kind of see what I'm getting at. Maybe I need to pull this down just a touch, but then that little flip at the end goes off the corner. I'm not going to worry about that too much for this demonstration. We're just going to leave it as it is. So I've got this shape and what I'd like is for the Coca-Cola, everything to be cut away or hidden that is not, or clipped, that is not within this ellipse. So to do that, and this is not just with images, this is with any other shape. So to do that, what I can do is I can select the first object, hold down Shift, select the other, and I want you to note the object that is doing the clipping is going to need to be on top of the object that is being clipped. And so if I go to my layers panel, which I still have open here because for whatever reason I always leave it open, right? This is the order it needs to be in the layer, right? I don't want this file to be up above the ellipse or else it's going to clip the other direction. So I select both of those. And there's a couple ways I can do this, but I go to Object, and if you remember, there's all these different things we can do down here. One of them down near the very bottom in the second to last chunk of options is a clipping mask. And if I go to my clipping mask and I say make, what that's going to do is it's going to essentially, right, use the ellipse to cut the other object. Now, it hasn't actually cut it, it's just hidden it. So if I double click on this, right, this is called a clip group. And if I can actually flip this open, you can see too, right? I still have this full image here that's unaltered. It's just being hidden by the clipping mask. I can also double click on here and I can select either the clip group, I can select the path for the ellipse. I could come down here and because this is behind everything, I could actually select that object itself and I could make changes to that, right? So this is one way that, right, raster images get used, is that they get brought in as like a part of the artwork that's being used. And oftentimes it needs to be clipped or formatted in some way. So that's one way that we can work with that. The other things that we can do with images like this is, right, some of us are really terrible at drawing with a drawing tablet, or we're really terrible at drawing with a mouse and keyboard or trackpad or whatever tool that we've got to draw in Illustrator, but we may have really good skills drawing things by hand, right? So one of the other ways that people use things in Illustrator is to take a hand drawing and use it as a way to essentially trace or do line work on top of that in Illustrator. So it's just the reference drawing. So if we go back to our image search and we just do a quick search for, so I just did Coca-Cola logo for that. If I just do maybe a character sketch or something like that, I don't know. You can see, right, there's all sorts of examples on here. Some of these are, right, very detailed. We're going to go with, I'm just going to grab this one because it's really beautifully rendered. And instead of, I'm going to go ahead and visit this page. I have to have an account with Pinterest. We're going to see if I can actually copy this image and paste it and have it work. So we're going to go ahead and copy this image. And again, right, we're just using this for education. I think whoever did this actual drawing did an amazing job. It's really gorgeous. So coming back here, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this in here, right? And then, so this layer now, right, I don't want to use this as artwork, but I want to be able to create my vector drawings on top of what's already here in this drawing. And so what I can do, one of the things we can do is I don't want to accidentally select this while I'm using the brush tools and things to draw on top of it. So next to the eyeball on any of these options, right? In this case, it's this random collection of characters, right? I can toggle a lock on, and that's going to mean that this layer is going to stay put. It's not going to move. I'm not going to accidentally select it. If you've ever worked with these things before, it can become a nightmare. But then I can go in and I can use things like I could potentially say, use the pen tool to come in and click and start to make, right, paths here, and then maybe put another point here, pull this out, zoom in a little bit, and come all the way back here. And then it looks like there's, right, like a pretty hard corner here, and then the line terminates there. I'm going to hit escape. And then I'm going to go ahead and use my selection tool. And, right, there's no fill or stroke on this right now, so I'm going to change and set a certain stroke. And maybe I want the stroke weight to be maybe 10 or however many points it requires to make that, right? And so now I've started using this artwork, right, as a reference for the artwork that I'm making in Illustrator. I'm not quite sure why. There we go. Okay, so right, so then I could also, again, right, change some of these other things. With this path, with this image that's selected, I can just drop this opacity down, right? So I can, it says it's locked, it doesn't, let's see here. Maybe it just doesn't care. or maybe it's because it's locked, I can't even select it. Okay, so if I select this and I set this to like 50%, right, that's going to give me a little bit more clear understanding of where I'm at with things. I'm going to go ahead and lock that again. Right, and so you can get the sense that now I can use, right, these kind of precision drawing tools to make outlines for this drawing. All right, so I can just come down here and continue to outline her hair and make this a vector-based artwork that then I could potentially use in many varied and different ways. Right, so that is, let's see here. Let's go ahead and adjust the stroke on this again. We're going to set some color and set this to 10 points. I'm not quite sure why it continues to disappear, but it's all right. All right, and again, I could either do I could set the width across the whole thing, or in this case, I kind of want this to be about the same thickness, but maybe I just want the tip to narrow. So then I can come in here and I can use the width tool, and I can shrink the tip down to a point, right? I could also maybe say give it a little bit of variation in line width as it goes through the work, whatever makes the most sense for the drawing. And so this is a way that, again, I can very quickly take my hand-drawn sketches and turn them into vector-based artwork. Okay. So that's another way that we can use this. I'm going to go ahead and lock both of those layers. I'm going to do a more in-depth tutorial that's going to just show some color on here and how to block things out. But we're going to lock this for the time being. So I'm going to go ahead and just lock these two paths. And then again, in this case, we can just hide them as well, so we don't have to look at them while we're working through the other things. Okay, so those are two ways that we can use drawings to help us out or to encapsulate some sort of image. So one of the other things we can do, and I'm going to go ahead and double click to get into this group. I'm going to select the Coca-Cola artwork, and I'm doing that in the layers panel by turning this little blue square on. And then I want to copy this, but I don't want to paste this into the group, right? So what I want to do is I want to double click somewhere off in space. So we're out of the group. I'm going to hit paste. So I just have this artwork again. And the reason we're using this again is I want to show some of the other tools that are available and ways you can convert a drawing like this into where you can take a raster image and convert it into a vector image. The way to do that is one of the options that comes up here at the very top of the screen, and that's image trace. If I click on image trace, automatically what that does is actually really good. It has taken the background out, and we just have this black and white Coca-Cola logo that looks really good. And this is vector based, right? So I could scale this up to print 48 inches wide, whereas if I had used that original image in the artwork, those pixels would show, right? Because it was a low resolution image. But this has allowed me to trace that. Now, there are different options for tracing, and there's this image trace panel available here. Also, if you have just done an image trace, you'll see that the panel is available here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that panel. And you'll see that I get a bunch of different settings here. I'm going to close this window. We don't need that open. And I can close the layers too. So one, it says there's some presets. There's also, all of these different preset options up here. But there's a bunch here in terms of what are we trying to do, right? This is probably, it says this is the default. It's also probably black and white logo. If I click on that, you're not going to see any change whatsoever because it's doing exactly the same thing. If I go to here, you can see tracing result with outlines. You'll see there are these pale blue outlines that kind of shows you where the paths are at. And for this object, it's pretty simple. I can just show the outlines. I can actually just show the outlines with the source image so I can see how well it's matching up. And I can just show the source image by itself. You can see how terribly pixelated that is and how much cleaner the tracing result looks. Now, the other thing I can do is if I change this to color, And right now, what it's going to do is things get a little bit sloppier, right? Because it is trying to, it currently is set to have a palette of 30 colors. And so it's basically dividing those and trying to make all these things. If I look at the tracing result with outlines, you're going to see that all of that checkerboard came in, and that's not what we want to have happen. Let's go ahead and give it the option of having only 2 colors. Let's see what it does. Now you'll see it took a little bit of time to process that, but now it's in red and black. Let's go ahead and just look at the tracing result. However, you're going to see there's a little bit of smudginess, right? Like things aren't quite right because where that red and those grids are coming together, it caused some issues. So if I go down here to the advanced panel at this point, if I'm really focused on this remaining red and not doing that in a second step, then I am going to have then it's going to be a little bit more challenging. Now, what I can do is I can dial down the number of corners, and we'll see if that helps any. It didn't really help with some of this stuff. This noise, right? The higher value means less noise, right? So if I click this and drag this up a little bit, we'll see, right? That smoothed things out, but it made other problems further down the line, right? If I drop this down again, right, we might get a slightly better result, but it looks like that's not really going to help us. If we drop the number of paths down to low, let's see what happens there, right? You can see it's actually helping some. There's just a couple errors there. If I drop my number of corners down some, let's see if I go all the way to 0, what happens. That helps a little bit too. Again, things are like a little bit better, but we're only going to get so much, right? And actually going up with the noise really doesn't help us at all, does it? It maybe helps there a little bit, right? So we got something close, but it's not perfect. So in this case, what I would suggest doing is actually going back to black and white, right? Just go to preset default. This actually did a really, really, really good job. And what we can do now is go ahead and we create our fills. We can also go down here and say we can have it ignore a color. And so if we check that box, it's going to ignore that color, which might mean that we just end up with this logo and we don't have to delete a background. But whatever the case, this method basically says, should this logo be cut out from the background? Or if we chose this other method, should this logo be on top of a pure white background? That's up to you. In our case, we're just going to use the logo. We want to get rid of this in the end. So now I've got this thing, but to use it and to manipulate it any further, I have to expand it. And so you'll note one of the quick actions here is expand. It's also up here because it's something that's used very frequently with this tool. So I hit expand. And now you can see it actually shrunk because, right, it ignored that color. So it got rid of that black background. So I should be able to put this on top of other things. And now if I want this color, the fill color, to be red, I should be able to use the eyedropper, grab that red color from the original logo, and then I've got it applied in my shape, right? So doing things, making vector artwork, especially from logos, is really useful. Let's go ahead and look at another image that is going to have a lot more color in it and see what some of the results are. So I'm going to come up here and I'm just going to search for sunset. And then maybe I'm just going to put in Wikimedia. So in this case, we are actually grabbing something that's Wikipedia Commons related. I'm going to grab this image of the sun. It looks like it has a bunch of smaller images at the bottom, which might be problematic. But let's go ahead and I'm just going to visit Wikipedia and see if I can if they have a better one. We'll do this one. It just has some brightness and stuff. And I'm just going to go ahead and right click, copy image. I'm going to come over to Illustrator. I'm going to deselect everything, otherwise it will paste it into that box. And I'm going to paste this. This thing is currently huge. I am going to shrink this down some. And I want you to note that it may give me a little bit of a warning when I do this because it's a larger image. But so if I leave it with if I just go to image trace and leave it with the default, you'll see it says it may proceed slowly because it's a large image. right? If I want to reduce the size, I can rasterize to a lower resolution using Object Rasterize. I'm going to hit Cancel. I'm going to go up to Object. I'm going to go down to Rasterize, which is right here in the middle. And I'm going to say change this to 72, and we'll hit OK. Now I'm going to try and do this again. It may still tell me it's a big image, but it didn't. Okay. So this is what happens with the default result. Honestly, it kind of looks cool, but maybe that's not exactly what we want to do. So let's look at some of these other options. If we click on auto color, right, now it's gone and it's basically set the number of colors to 25%, right? You can kind of see we get like a range of colors, but really it's vectorized the heck out of this artwork. If I crank this up a little bit higher, let's see what happens, right? We're going to get more layers of color. And if I was to, let's go ahead and do high color as an option, right? It's going to take a while to think about this, and you're going to see we get a reasonably close approximation to the original image. This thing is absolutely chock full of, if I click on tracing result with outlines, you're going to see how many different shapes this is made up of, right? This is really an intense amount of objects layering on top of each other, right? Because it's not making gradients, it's making solid fills of slightly different colors. And so we've created this monstrosity. There are other options. If we go to grayscale, it doesn't have it there. Actually, let's see here. If we go down to, if we went to sketched art, right, it's going to be, again, a similar result to the black and white. If we go to shades of gray, right, we're going to get, and I'll turn this off, right? We're going to get a black and white image instead. And so there's a lot of options in here. If we go to technical drawing, we're not going to get a whole lot. One of the things that helps us with, like if we wanted to see what the result would actually look like with a technical drawing, we can adjust this threshold value, right? That's where it's choosing whether it should be white or black. And if I increase this, right, it's going to disappear everything. If I decrease this too much, we're going to get some more, but not much, right? This is really a terrible image to attempt to do like a technical drawing preset with. Even line art is probably going to be problematic, but we've at least got a few more lines. Let's see what happens if we go lower. We just get different lines, right? There's enough of a tonal range here. You could do something interesting, right? If you layered some of this, like these line drawings on top of the original photo or something like that, would be kind of cool. But yeah. But again, right, in this case, it's not really a great image to use for doing line art, right? Which is kind of hilarious. But yeah, so you can see there's, right, you get a little closer with some, a little further away with others. Silhouette kind of works. If I dial this threshold down, you'll see that slowly the silhouette's going to change. If I just needed that landscape as, right, this would be a really effective way to get that, and so again, right, these settings allow you to have some freedom, but the tool only goes so far. So there's other things like 16 colors or 6 colors or 3 colors. And basically what that's doing is it's just going to set, right, a total number of colors for the image, for the resulting image. Okay, so let's say I'm happy with 16 colors, but I'm going to want to, say, recolor this artwork, which we haven't really talked about recently. So I'm going to go ahead and hit expand. And once I hit expand, right, this group has some options here. And this is one of the things we haven't talked about, which is recolor object. So if I go ahead and click on recolor object and close the image trace dialog, what this is going to do is it's going to bring up this color wheel. And there's a bunch of these different tabs here, which is basically all the colors, right, every single shape. And the reason I did it with 16 colors and not like full color is because this thing would be a nightmare and my computer might crash. But so if I go ahead, this changes the entire thing. So if I dial this in, it's going to make the entire thing more pale. If I rotate it around, right, it's going to change this into purple or, whatever color you want, but it's going to keep the palette similar in terms of, right, the amount of distance between each one of these color points. And so you can come through and just, right, recolor your artwork this way. there's some other tools in here as well. There's some advanced options, but I just wanted to show you that you could go in and tweak things and make your artwork a different color. And this goes for any artwork in here, obviously not a raster image that hasn't been made, but even if I select the Coca-Cola logo, granted it's one color, but I could use recolor, to adjust the color of even this one color in like a better way than maybe using other things. Okay. So yeah, so that is how we can use image trace. You can only get so many results. What's nice too is you can come in here and select these individual objects once it's expanded, and you could change colors to whatever you want manually as well instead of doing it as a group. But I just wanted everybody to know how to do the simple recoloring. Okay, so that's 3 ways that we can work with images with raster images in Illustrator. And remember, we did hide these layers that we locked. And again, I will probably move from this to kind of show some examples of how you can use lines like this, merge them all together, and use them to create fill areas rather than having to create a shape that aligns with this or deal with some of the issues of having an open path with a fill in it. So we're going to look at some pretty great ways that we can create other things with this. Okay, see you in this tutorial. Kind of pick up a bit where we left off with this, using this drawing as a reference, and specifically it's just a little short tutorial on how to. So in this tutorial, we're going to pick up where we left off on the last one, which is basically just using any base drawing that you've done. This is not my artwork. I actually was looking for who did this to give them attribution, but it's the Google image search went to a defunct website, so I'm having trouble finding who actually did this original work. But again, just using this as a reference to show how to do this process. And so what we're going to do is we're going to actually be using the line work that we've done in order to create objects that will be our fills. And so I'm going to go ahead, and I did several of the lines on here just so this goes a little more quickly. But to start with, we're going to go ahead and move away from that main image. And I want to show you the general process in something much simpler. And then we will look at how that applies to an object like that. So the first thing to do is to use the paintbrush, or any drawing tool really will work fine. But typically the reason you'd be doing this is because you're doing line work and you want to be able to use those lines to create solid fills to at least start your coloring. And so if I go ahead and draw a couple of lines, right? And so I've got these 2 lines, and I want you to note that they intersect, that the width of the line itself is connected. And we're going to go ahead and do a couple different options here where one is fully connected, the other one is not. And we'll see kind of the differences and what happens and how these things function, right? So that's it. I just used, this is one of the ink strokes. You could just use the basic, and the line I have selected is actually over here. You could just use the basic and then boost your line thickness and change from uniform to one of these other profiles to get like a similar thing. And I'm just going to set this to 10 points, right? It really depends on what you're working on. But the idea is that we're going to have these solid lines intersecting. And so this is a couple part process, but the first step is we want to select the lines that we want to merge together. And before we can merge these together and make them a unified whole in the way that we need to, what we want to do is we want to expand these lines. And what that means is we're going to take it from a line and turn it actually into a shape. And the stroke will be the shape. So this is a step you do only when you're happy with the way the line work looks at that point in your drawing process, right? If you're still at a place where you're like, oh, I really want to test out a couple different brushes or whatever, then you're going to want to wait to do this next step. So we select those two, and we're just going to go up to Object. We're going to go to Expand Appearance, and it will expand those. And you'll see right now they are shapes with these intersections. So now that we have those shapes with intersections, what we want to do is we want to go over to our Pathfinder, which is over here in the Properties panel. If you can't see it there, you can always go up to Window at the top of the screen and then go down to Pathfinder, and it will pop open. And there's all of these different options. And so we could probably either use Unite or Merge. Both of these are going to work in this case. If I click Merge, right, you can see that that has become one solid shape. If I undo that and do Unite, in this case, it'll work exactly the same. So either one of those that look like two overlapping shapes that have the same fill are what we're going to be looking for. Okay, so we've used the Pathfinder to do that fill. Now what we would need is we want to be able to essentially, right now we just have this edge. We'd want to create a fill for this shape that we've made. And to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to go over, we're going to grab, say, our rectangle tool. We're going to click and drag to create a big rectangle. And right now that fill is black. Let's go ahead and just make it cyan or something, just a little bit easier to see the difference. And we're going to right click. We could either right click on this and adjust where it is in the order, or we can just open up our layers menu and go ahead and go to this rectangle and just drag it below that compound path that we just made. So now that we've got these two objects, we're going to go ahead and select both of them. And once we've selected both of them, we need to use our Pathfinder again. And the one we want to use is divide. You'll see that you can see it's like, a square with two edges on there. And what that means is basically we're going to be using this path to cut out this background object. So if I click here and click divide, now what it's going to give us is this group here in our thing, right? We have our different options here. So if I double click in here, now I can select that interior shape. I can select this exterior shape, delete that. And now I have this object with this like custom fill. Now, granted, these are two separate objects. They're grouped together, but right, this stroke is not necessarily part of this object, right? I could always add an additional stroke on here if I wanted to for some reason, right? Just to give some sense that that's possible as well. But the big thing is that I have this solid fill that I can start using as a base fill color for my objects. And it's a really nice way to quickly get things working. So now if we go over to this other example where I have paths that don't connect on one side, we'll see what happens when we do this. So we go up and we want to unite or merge these two together. You can see already that's problematic because, right, this edge was not closed. And so it did a lot of crazy stuff to make that one continuous thing. If I go and try merge this time, right, it says the filter produced no results. Please select two or more filled and overlapping paths, right? So both of these have failed in this case because there's this gap here. So this is something that you do have to pay attention to, is you want to make sure that when you link all of these things together, they actually are cohesive and there isn't a hole in the path. Because in this case, right, this one is not doing, unfortunately, what we want to. It's making a very, very strange thing, right? Any of these other options are going to result in less than ideal outcomes. So, right, the biggest thing is that you actually have a pretty solid connection between the 2 points. And so that's something which is why I started with something less complex than this. And that's because, right, there's a lot of line work here. But the big thing is that we want to make sure when we unite our objects, once we do our couple steps, that things like this little tiny gap here don't exist, right? So I'm going to take my direct selection tool and I'm just going to nudge this down a little bit. I can see there's also an issue here where that edge is a little bit cut off. So I'm just going to go ahead and adjust that while I'm there. Similarly, this is a little bit hard, but I'm not too worried about that. However, if I come down here, you'll see that because I haven't finished out this path, this isn't done yet. And so what I've been doing with this is I've just been using the brush tool. And if you double click on the brush tool, you can set the fidelity higher. And I'm using my trackpad and my fingers to draw all of these lines. And I'm going to go ahead and uncheck keep selected. And I'm going to hit OK. And now I'm going to go ahead and just draw or trace along this. I'm going to try and make this one continuous path, right? And you'll see that, right, that kind of trails off in the original drawing, but we know that we're going to need to connect these together for this drawing. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And you'll see that I'm getting like some wiggliness there, which isn't really going to be too big of an issue. And I probably could have undone that last little bit that I just did there. But you can see now, right, these are connected through here. And so at least the outside of this shape is totally cohesive. I'm going to go ahead and start up here on her jawline. I'm going to go ahead and draw down and do her, right, her neckline into there. And again, I want to make sure that there are pixels there, right, things are connected. And I'm going to go ahead and I know I'm going to do, right, this is all in shadow. I probably can leave that alone for the time being. I'm going to go ahead and do the other side of her neck though. So I have the line work there. And then I'll do the top of her shirt. All right. And I'm going to do this other lapel on her collar. I guess it's not technically a lapel, but, and I'm going to come up and I'm going to try and finish up her hair here as well. You can see that it went a little bit, that smoothing went a little bit crazy there. So maybe what I'm going to do is drop my fidelity down. Man, it only lets you do big jumps, but that's all right. So I'm going to try this again. All right, I've got that set. I'm going to come in here, start where that brush stroke was, go down there. And similarly, I'm going to come in and do this swoop of hair out. Go ahead and do that one. It's not quite lined up, but that's fine. All right, and then I might as well go ahead and do that little mark as well. Now I could do some of these interior bits as well if I wanted to. These could always be, you know, separate and could be done as a, right, as a different layer with a different color or something like that. But for our purposes, that's how we're going to work with this. Okay, so I'm going to say I'm pretty well done with this. I'm a little concerned about this point right here connecting. And so what I may do is, I know I use two different line types on here. So yeah, so I'm going to go back to basic, which is going to make that really thin. I'm going to make this, but then I'm going to make this 10 points. And that should thicken it up a little bit, but then I can also still go ahead and grab this anchor and pull that into that other line just a little bit further. Right now up here where all of her hair starts, where her hairline starts, this might also be a little bit problematic, right? Because what's going to happen is her forehead and her hair is going to be connected as one object, and we don't really want that to happen. So I may need to take my brush and I may just need to do, right, a little line through there. Now that's pretty thick with the settings that it currently has. So in this case, I may go and use, right, this basic line. Oh, I'm going to have to select it. Hold on. I may go ahead and just use a basic line on there and just do something really thin that I could potentially get rid of pretty easily. But it's just enough to make that connection so that that chunk is separate. Okay, so now that I've done that, let's see if I get some sort of success with this, or if I've really like screwed it up in some major way. So we're going to go ahead and pull this over. Currently there's no fill on this, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do something more somewhere in skin tone range just to start with. And I'm going to say no stroke on this. It does not need a stroke. It just needs to be the solid block. I'm going to hit the letter V. I'm going to right click and I am going to go to arrange and send backward. And this is going to take too long. So I'm going to go through all of these paths that I've made go all the way down so that I am below all of the paths that create our face. And you can kind of see how many paths start to come in. And I just want to be above the drawing, right? So I think here kind of encapsulates all of that. Okay, so we've got all the line work done. And when I went forward with this tutorial, I ran across a problem I hadn't encountered before. And that is that when we go and do the next step where, right, we expand the appearance and merge things together, I started to have some issues with the artwork and I couldn't figure out what was going on. So it took me a second, but I figured it out. So first, if we select all of this artwork and first we go to expand it, we go up to Object, Expand Appearance. I want you to note that some of these lines didn't expand, while as the rest of them did expand, but I want you to see that they've all turned into groups. Some of them are still paths. This is problematic, and it's going to break the next couple steps that we attempt to do. And I couldn't figure out why it was doing this until I realized that up here I have different types of strokes, right, applied to the line work. And so this process only really works if you make sure everything is uniform. And so at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the basic line, and then I'm going to go ahead and set this to 10 points, which is a little heavy. And I'm going to set the width profile. Honestly, this width profile might work a little better in terms of connection of everything, but we're going to go ahead and just go with the narrow one because I actually like how that looks better. But so we've got our 10 points. We've set this all up. Now I found through experience that this will actually work correctly. If I was to go up now and go to Object and Expand Appearance, every single path, these ones that didn't expand before, have expanded, right? So that's great. However, we want to do one last check because we changed our line thickness. You can see there are little areas where there's a gap. So we are going to want to select one of these paths, like say this one, use our direct selection tool, and let's just go ahead and make sure that that's closed. And I know, again, from experience that there was one other area. I was hoping to get just a little bit more space here, so maybe we can just pull these both up a little bit. Makes her hair look a little fluffier. But there's another spot here by the eye where I didn't do a good job connecting these, and that caused issues later down the line. We might actually, I'm going to leave this one open so you can see how to fix it when we go through the next steps. Other places where there might be a problem is just right here. I'm going to go ahead and just pull her collar in a little bit more and maybe expand that out. Okay, and then if we just double check all of these other points, that looks good. Pretty much everything else looks good. Okay, so now we're ready to do that next step. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the letter V so I can do my selection tool. Select everything in here, hold down Shift, deselect that background because we just want the line work right now. Then I'm going to go ahead and say Object, Expand Appearance. Once I've expanded the appearance, I am going to be able to merge this. So I'm going to go ahead and say Merge. And now this has all done things correctly, right? Like there were some mistakes made previously that would have caused some issues, but at this point we're in a good spot. Now there's certain areas where like the line work goes through here. This is a perfect time to say either take the eraser or potentially use the pencil tool to come down here and just draw a line, right? Essentially straight across there, right? That's going to get rid of that chunk. Straight across here to get rid of that chunk. You can see there's a couple other places where these parts spike through. It's good to do this before we do the next step, just because it saves time. If we try and do that next step, sometimes we have some other issues that are going to come up when we do that. It means that the fill's also going to have a little cut missing out of it, and so we just have to do the same operation twice. And we would prefer not to have to do that any more work than we need to do, right? Okay. Right, so I've cleaned those up. There's maybe a couple other spots where I could do a little cleanup, but I'm not super worried about it at this point. Okay, so let's go ahead and select all of this. And this time we're going to leave the background selected. And now we're going to use the divide function, right? Just like we did down here, we're going to hit divide. And once we've done that, this whole thing should be a group. If I double click within the group, I can just select this outside place. I can hit delete if I want that to be cut free. And now I have all of these other spaces, and you'll see that there's like a little gap here because there must have been a gap there, but we can just fill that in with the paint, with the brush tool, or the blob brush tool. So now I can say select the elements that are the hair, right? All of these chunks here. And I might leave that inside chunk alone because that's going to be a different color. And let's go ahead and give her, I don't know, green hair, right? Oh, and so this is where, right? This is what happens when you leave a little gap, right? I left this here on accident. And you can see I actually have some other errors here too. That's interesting. I didn't know that was gonna, Anyway, so we have a little error here. So that's why her face is turning green with the hair. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna double click to isolate the hair. And then we can come down here and we can use the eraser tool. And I'm gonna double click so I can make the size, oh, it's already 10 points. It's pretty small, right? But what I really need to do is essentially I want to have like a gap right here, right, between these two objects. And what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to use the shape builder tool. And the shape builder tool allows you to either join shapes together, or if we actually have something selected, oh, look at that. It might actually have already split. Yeah, it looks like it already took it apart. Great. So we could maybe give her something that's more of a skin tone. There we go. All I had to do was do that eraser. That's fantastic. Let's actually see if we can use the swatches for this, because there's some tones in here. I'm going to go a little lighter because the line weight's going to be too dark. So let's just go there. Did I just use the same exact color for her face? I think I did. There we go. Okay. Right. So let's say that's her general skin tone. You can see there's a chunk here that, or maybe there's a couple chunks here. There's this one and this one that we're going to need to change to that same tone. I can actually, while we're here, why don't we just select both of her eyes and go ahead and we could make that white. We probably don't want it to be perfectly white. We might want to go more into the warm, like a kind of warm yellow cream color, and just step this down just a little bit so it's not quite so harsh. Right? And obviously she doesn't have any irises or anything yet. So we've got that done. Let's go ahead and select the other parts of her hair here, those two spots right there. We can go ahead and make those a darker green. Oh, that's too vibrant. Maybe that, well, that's still too bright. So let's go ahead and open this up. And it's a little too aquamarine-y too. So let's just go ahead and dull that down a little bit. Okay. All right, so now she's got that. Oh, and then let's go ahead and select the collar, and maybe she's wearing a blue-ish shirt. And then there's this other section of collar in here that should probably be just like a slightly darker blue. So I'm going to start by eyedropping that blue in there. And then I'm going to go ahead and double click here and make it just a little bit darker. Now you'll see, right, I do have these errors here where you can still see those cuts in there, which is kind of odd to me. I thought that the other process would have resolved that, but whatever the case, it didn't. So I'm going to go ahead and select this section. Then I'm going to use my blob brush, and I'm just going to go ahead and fill that in. Right? And you'll see it looks like it's painting on top of the line, but it's actually painting behind it. It's going to be painting on the layer I'm selecting. And so you can get those little spots cleaned up. I can come up here. If I use my selection tool, I can select the hair, and then I can use the blob brush to fill back in this area that we lost when we did that. And then also I can fill in those little cuts there. Right? And so now her hair there looks a little better. You can see she's got a little bit of brown there, a little there, and a little down here. So what we're going to go ahead and do there is we will select one of those areas, if not all of them, but I'm going to start with this one. I'm going to use the eyedropper. It is the letter I on the keyboard. And I'm just going to eyedrop that color in there. I'm going to hit V. I'm going to zoom into this, see if that's, notice how the color went black. That means I actually selected the path and not that fill. Still is selected in black, so that may be something I'll have to deal with later. It seems like it's being a little fussy. But if I select this and select that, and then go ahead and do the eyedropper and find that dark green somewhere, all right, I can pull that dark green back in there. Now, this is another spot where I might want some dark green. So I can go ahead and just use the blob brush right now and click and drag. And you'll see that in this case, it ended up on top of this, and I am in isolation mode. So I'm going to go ahead and get out of isolation mode. And yeah, you can see, right, this path is now the top path in the group. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull this thing down. And it might make sense to group some of these other paths, but if I just pull this down to the very bottom, it's going to go into the background. Okay, so we've got these other things set, and maybe what I should do is select her face and actually just leave it at the default tone I had before. And then we can say, oh, that's just part of her face that's in shadow. And now let's go ahead and see how we can do a little bit more work. So if you remember in the original drawing, there was some shadow under her chin. So let's go ahead and grab the eyedropper. And we can go ahead and let's deselect everything. Let's grab the eyedropper and we're going to select that brown so we have that selected. We could just have a few squares of the different colors here so we can eyedrop them quickly. But in this case, I'm not going to do that. Now I'm going to use the blob brush. I'm going to come in and I'm going to make the brush bigger. And I'm going to go ahead and draw in here. All right. And so now this is going to turn into shadow under her chin. And now that I've got the shadow under her chin, you can see I went a little bit crazy on the side there. I'll go ahead and erase some of that. All right, now that I've got that shadow there, I can go ahead and again, just drag this down through the paths. And I'm just going to keep going until I don't want to be below the chin, which I guess I just did. I don't know how far down I went, but we're going to go ahead and go back up. It looks like I went flying past everything facially related. You can see I'm starting to get there. There we go. Okay. Now I do have the eraser set. I can erase some of that a little bit again. There we go. All right. And there's a little bit here on her neck that also needs to go. So let's get that out of there. And maybe on this part of her chin too. All right. Okay. So I've got the chin shadow. Let's go ahead and add some shadow to the hair. So to add the shadow to the hair, I'm going to do a similar thing, but I'm going to shrink my brush for my blob brush. And I'm going to deselect everything. I'm going to use the eyedropper tool, and I'm going to grab the dark green from here. Then I'm going to use the Shift B to grab the brush tool. And if I go in here, it's like, oh, I know that this probably has some shadow under it. And right, maybe there's a little bit of dark green that pops in here somewhere, right? These little touches here just to add a bit to it. Now, if I was using something other than just like my mouse and keyboard, I might be able to have a little bit more subtle line thickness on this, but I'm going quick just to get this tutorial finished for y'all. So, all right, so we go through here. I can add a little bit there, and I could add more in some of these other places. I'm just gonna do a couple little spots here, and let's see if there's anything further we want to do. I think that'll be good for now. So I have all of these paths up here that I just created. And I can probably just go ahead and select all of those. And at this point with all of those dark green patches selected, if I'm done with that work, one of the things I could do is I could say Object, and I could go down to Compound Path and Make. And what that's going to do is it's basically going to make these all just one object, which is going to make life easier when we go through dragging it down through all of these different paths. And at some point in this list, it will pop out right there. Now these are all underneath the different parts of the hair. And you can see that I could, if I wanted to at this point, take the eraser tool and I could come in here and clean some of this up and make it like look a little bit better because, you know, I didn't do the best job in the world here. But you get the idea, right? You can come through and it looks like this is still on top of the other thing, but that one looks pretty good. I might need to see where we're at in this path. This is the compound path. No. Where did our other compound path go? Oh no, weird. There. I must have undone a step. Anyway, all right, so we can pull this down below some other paths until we get, there we go, until we get far enough down the line that we could have this set. All right, so that's this tutorial, right? You can imagine like adding more shadow with the same tone around her face, under the hair, etc. But this is just a way that allows you to, to basically use that line work as a cutting guide. You just have to make sure, again, that all these corners connect in order to create those full shapes. But you can, obviously, as we did here, right, use the eraser tool to create two separate shapes and fix it that way as well. Okay, that's the end of that tutorial.